as we write less and less for humans and more for agents, is that kind of, style and that kind of, those kind of quality issues, does it really matter? So in other words, we're providing the source content for agents, right? So our customers will go to our help and they'll type in a question, how do I create a commerce store? And then our agent will look at the source content that we provide and then provide an answer to the user, tell them how to create a store. So the human reader is not actually reading our source content in many cases. So I started thinking, why am I spending all this time making this look pretty and really high quality if it's just going to be thrown over the wall to an agent? Why can't I just sort of give everything to the agent and they can figure it out? Agents are supposed to be smart, right? How much time would that save us, And also we use AI tools a lot of time to actually create our writing. And so I was like, well, we're using AI to create the writing and then we're fixing it up and then we're giving it back to AI. Why not just skip the middleman and just give it to AI?
Welcome to the Culture of Writing podcast, where writers, editors, and content strategists from Salesforce talk about how we work together to improve our craft and make content better. I am happy to be joined by Lori Adams. I'll let you introduce yourself, but you're content strategist for the Commerce Cloud. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Lori and I work for the Content Experience Group in Salesforce, which I think a lot of people outside of the industry don't realize the scale of. I mean, we have Content Experience is over 550 people producing all the content, right, that our developers and our customers and our admins need to use the product and succeed with it. We have amazing customers. And Lori presented a few weeks ago, actually, some really interesting observations, because the main tension, or one of the tensions that I think a lot of creators all over the industry face, not just at Salesforce, is what is AI going to be? How is AI going to influence the way I work? And particularly, are there things I should do differently for the ingestion of AI agents? And so that was sort of your talk. You can expand on that, but I thought a lot of people would benefit from hearing what you had to say.
Sure. So so in my role as content strategist, I review a lot of drafts, a lot of first drafts that writers do. And historically, my strategy review is all about, do we really need this new topic? Does it fit with our other content? Where should we put it? Does it make sense? That kind of high level thing. But recently, Salesforce has sort of backed off on editorial support, because what I used to do is, after I did my strategy review, then I would ask the writer to send it to our editorial team, who would look at it to make sure that it had the right Salesforce voice and tone and style and grammar and all the sort of more detailed stuff. So I didn't have to do that stuff. But now we've sort of cut back on our editorial staff. So a lot of that has kind of fallen back to me. So I end up doing almost like a line edit in addition to my strategy edit. And that's not something I particularly enjoy. So I started thinking, as we write less and less for humans and more for agents, is that kind of, style and that kind of, those kind of quality issues, does it really matter? So in other words, we're providing the source content for agents, right? So our customers will go to our help and they'll type in a question, how do I create a commerce store? And then our agent will look at the source content that we provide and then provide an answer to the user, tell them how to create a store. So the human reader is not actually reading our source content in many cases. So I started thinking, why am I spending all this time making this look pretty and really high quality if it's just going to be thrown over the wall to an agent? Why can't I just sort of give everything to the agent and they can figure it out? Agents are supposed to be smart, right? So, and also I've heard recently some of our leaders have sort of implied the same thing. Oh, you don't have to worry about consistency so much. It's not so important. And so I thought, how much time would that save us, And also we use AI tools a lot of time to actually create our writing. And so I was like, well, we're using AI to create the writing and then we're fixing it up and then we're giving it back to AI. Why not just skip the middleman and just give it to AI? So what I decided to do is kind of go right to the source. So I went to Gemini, which is one of the AI tools that we use. And I just asked it this question, does it matter if for the source material that we're providing for you, how important is it that it be of high quality, that it doesn't have passive voice, that things that are supposed to be bold or bold-faced, Does that matter to you? And I had this really interesting long discussion with Gemini. You know, and I know that we can't always rely on AI models to give us accurate information, and we have to be careful and all of that. So I kept that in mind, and yet still it was kind of I learned a lot, and I think it was kind of enlightening for that conversation.
That is awesome. You are so right about AI. But let's dive in, if you don't mind. Like, this is really interesting. I would not have thought to have asked Gemini that question.
So if Gemini's first response was, well, if you're going to give me garbage, I'm going to return garbage, you know, garbage in, garbage out. If you just throw over the wall a bunch of words, I'm going to not be able to do it. I said, all right, I get that. I said, but we can't just throw you random words, but how particular do we really have to be? And so, you know, during this conversation, we got into specifics, and we talked about passive voice, right? Which is something that we as tech writers, it's a bugaboo. You never use passive voice, right? So when I'm editing things, I'm always saying, don't use passive voice, get rid of this. So if I think the example was something like, the files must be backed up before you migrate the system, right? That was the example that Gemini and I were talking about. And so if a writer gave me that, the files must be backed up before you migrate the system, I would be like, oh my goodness, no, this is passive voice. You have to change this to active, and I would send it back, right? But I said to Gemini, well, what if we relax that? I mean, you can figure out what that means, right? Why do I have to be marking every instance of passive voice? And Gemini gave me a really interesting answer. It said, in fact, as an AI model, I will try to be very helpful. So if you give me source material that says something like, the files must be backed up before you migrate the system, and then a user asks me, what do I have to do before I migrate the system? I will say, the files have to be backed up, and there's an automatic utility that will do that for you. I'll just make something up to be helpful, which is so scary, right? Because now you have a user who's not backing up their files. and it was like, well, you know, as an AI model, I always want to try to be helpful. And that was really interesting to me, because I thought, in this case, not only can we not relax our standards, we have to be especially careful, because, you know, a human writer could actually probably deal with that. You know, the files have to be backed up. They might not know who backs up the files, but they would make sure they found out and figured that out. Whereas if they get an answer from AI that just says, well, there's an automatic utility that does that for you, they might not do anything. Could be really dangerous.
And just to clarify, the automatic utility, it said, oh, I just thought that would be helpful, so I made that up.
Gemini literally told me this is what I would say in response to that, and Gemini just made up the automatic utility, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's just so scary.
What we call a hallucination.
Well, yeah, sort of, yeah, an active hallucination. I don't know. And then, so that made me very afraid. And then I said, well, okay, how about some of these things like boldface, right? So our style at Salesforce is to always boldface a button. So if you click save, the word save is boldface, because that's a button. I said, you know, do we really have to be that particular? If I'm just giving this to you as source content, it's kind of behind the scenes. What do you care if I boldface things? So, and we talked about this example. We said, well, what if there was a sentence that said, after you add a new user, click add and then click save. So add and save are both buttons that you have to click, right? And so if a writer gave me that and they had only boldfaced one of those buttons, so say it said, after you add a new user, click add, they didn't boldface add, and then click save, and they did boldface save, right? And so normally I would say, well, I would go back to the writer and say, you have to boldface both of these buttons, that's our style. But what if I didn't do that? What if I didn't bother? And Gemini said, well, I wouldn't necessarily know what to say. I wouldn't necessarily say the right thing, because I will have learned from your content that buttons are always bolded, or almost always bolded. So if a user said to me, what do I have to do after I add a user? I might skip over the add button and just say click save, because add was not boldfaced. And that would be the wrong thing. And again, I thought, wow, this is so interesting, because if we gave this to a human writer, I don't think any human writer would have trouble with, click add and then click save, even if we forgot to boldface one of them. But the AI model actually was giving a worse response. So we have to be extra careful to make sure we follow all of our guidelines.
That is so interesting. The way Peter Conrad put it is that it's not artificial intelligence, it's alien intelligence, in that it just does not think like we do. Because you're saying any human would have, that's a nuance that a human would pick up on it instantly, right?
Exactly. Right. So, and then the next one we talked about was a little bit more subtle, but it was about unclear pronouns. So, for instance, the example that Gemini spoke about was something like, I think it was like how to create an analytics dashboard. 3 steps, right? Step 1, upload a file. Step 2, create an analysis job. Step 3, select it and click run. Now, the it in step 3 is unclear. Are you talking about the file that you uploaded in step 1? Are you talking about the job analysis in step 2? What is it? And again, I think that a human, if I was editing that again, I would mark up the it and say, make this more specific. But if I didn't do that, if I was relaxing my standards, I think a human would understand that step 3 was unclear, but could probably figure it out from the context and what they were looking at on the screen. But Gemini said, in that situation, I would just flip a coin and pick one. And I would tell the user, upload your file, create the job analysis report, and then select your file or select your job analysis report and click run. He said, again, I would try to be helpful and I would pick one, and a 50-50 chance it's going to be the wrong one. So once again, we have to be not only, we can't relax our standards, we have to be super clear for the AI model.
That's really interesting. So not only what we're saying is kind of where we are now, right? AI is changing so quickly, is that we've got this great tool. It can help us. A human has to be in the loop to make sure, and that precision. I'm in, just full disclosure, I am an editor, and vague pronouns are something that I mark too. That precision is even more important because this intelligence, these large language models, do not think the way that we think.
It's true. And we also talked about, Gemini and I, some sort of bigger picture issues. Like I said, well, okay, what about disorganization, right? So say a writer sends me a draft and all the information is there, but it's kind of disorganized. It's in different places. It's not well written. And that would take me a long time, possibly, right? To go back and forth with the writer to straighten that out. And I said, well, in that case, really, what's the difference? If all the information is there and I just give it to you, can't you sort through and find the answer to the question that you need without my having to organize it all for you? And it said, well, maybe, but apparently the way that these models work is that they chunk information. So if they've got a long help article, for example, they might chunk it into several different parts. And you might not have, if you haven't organized it well, you might not have all the information together in one chunk. So we use the example of a situation talking about data sync, right? And a long help article talking about data sync. And at the beginning, we say data sync happens automatically every 24 hours, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other information. And somewhere in the middle, we say, if you're using version 4, the automatic data sync is broken and you have to do it manually. And then way down at the bottom, there's the troubleshooting section where it says, by the way, if data sync isn't working for you, you can do it manually. Here's the command, right? So now our user comes along. So AI has got this as source content in potentially 3 different chunks, the beginning, the middle, and the end. A user comes along and says, how often does data sync happen? So what Gemini said is, I will look for the clearest answer to that question, which is data sync happens every 24 hours, right? And then Gemini said, I might also notice the troubleshooting thing in this other chunk that says if data sync isn't happening for you automatically, you can do it manually, and here's the command. But it's very likely if that exception, if you're using version 4, this isn't going to happen, that will get lost because it's in this middle chunk. It's not clearly marked as an exception. So I may very well not mention that, and the user wouldn't know. So what Gemini said we would need to do, right, as writers, is to reorganize so that we had all this pieces of information together. We'd say, data sync happens every 24 hours, with the exception of version 4 when it doesn't happen at all, and you have to do it manually. So all that was information was together. So Gemini said, you can't just skip organizing and putting the right information together. You have to help us with that, because we won't necessarily find it or return the right answer if it's in different chunks.
Okay, that is really interesting, because I'm sure you have the same observation. I have always found that a lot of the problems with even good writers, and myself included, are structural, or that the organization is lacking. And I have noticed that myself without being smart enough to query the AI. I asked a Slack bot, which is Slack's AI, which is it's a wonder of the world. I mean, it's incredible. So what did I do the last quarter for a check-in? And it came back with reams of information, most of which I had completely forgotten about. So it was really helpful. But it was, like you say, it was kind of all over the map. It was a lot of repetition, and it dropped one area and go into another area, and then mention a little trivial piece of that other area way down here. And so it's kind of a bit of a slop. Very helpful, but it was a slog to get it organized.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Is that we really can't get rid of that human touch, at least not yet. Maybe at some point the tools will be smarter, but as you said, I'm not sure they're thinking the way that we're thinking ever.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's Peter Conrad's observation, and that really resonates with me, because it helps me understand. It doesn't think the way I do. It's not putting information together the way that I do. So this is incredibly, incredibly interesting.
Yeah, and I think I've just covered probably the major pieces that Gemini discussed. But I'd encourage it was. I don't remember why I decided to ask Gemini, but I thought I'm just going to go to the source, and we should maybe do that more often. They'll tell the AI model will tell you what they're going to do.
That's incredible. And the other person that told me that was Ian Varley, and I thought, this is such a smart thing to do. And when you said that, I thought, this is really smart. But the observations that that you take from that are super timely, right, for any content creator, any writer. So it's amazing. But any other interesting tidbits from your? It sounds like a platonic dialogue with Gemini. Actually, great.
I mean, anyone can do it. You could go have your own dialogue, but those are kind of the major things we talked about. Specifics like bold facing, and then things like organization. But it really made me start thinking about, are we doing the right thing to be thinking that maybe editors aren't important anymore? Maybe they're more important than ever. I don't know. Maybe our role as tech writers is more about editing, and the AI is going to help us gather the material, and then we edit. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but I think when we started with the AI, we all imagined perhaps that we could do something like just throw over the wall a bunch of random facts and then it would sort it out. And it almost seems like it's not going to do that at all. It's the reverse of that almost.
It does not do it now. That's for sure. And when you talk about editors, I cannot stand as an unbiased witness, being an editor and loving editors. So, but we have made the observation that it is incumbent upon any creator that you really have to become a super editor. You have to become an editor of the output, because you're absolutely right. It is great. It's great at gathering and sorting and kind of taking a bunch of information from all over the place. But the output is still something that needs to be sort of ruthlessly evaluated.
And keeping in mind that as Gemini kept telling me, I'm going to try to help the user. I'm going to try to be helpful and fill in if it doesn't have the information, which could be really dangerous.
Yeah, the filling in is that's always interesting. So, I don't know.
I'm really marking as passive voice. No passive voice. Can't do that. We don't know what AI is going to do with this.
Well, and that's just obviously general principle of good writing. Well, not obviously, but it is a classic principle of good writing, period, not just tech writing.
It is. But don't you think when AI started that we all thought, oh, we're not going to have to worry about those details anymore? There was that's part of what we were thinking is, that's not going to be so important. And I think it's
absolutely. I mean, one of the experiments that we did early on, and they're still ongoing, is taking source documents and creating a release note. for example, from technical documents. And that has turned out to be a lot more challenging than I would have imagined. I kind of thought, oh, that's a no-brainer, right? You take the facts and tell it this is the template. It's a lot more challenging because, again, going back to Peter Conrad, we're dealing with alien intelligence. We sort of have to learn how to craft things so that it can produce for us.
Yeah, it seems to do a good job of sort of polishing things up too. If you, the writer, I do this a lot when somebody sends me a draft and I can see that these sentences aren't clear and I don't have the time or can't think about how to fix them. I'll ask Slackbot, for example, how would I write this more clearly? And it's good at that sort of thing. If you have the words and you know what you're trying to say. On its own, it's not necessarily reliable.
Yeah, on a granular line level, it is very, very good at that. Or it's good at taking a kind of a gassy paragraph and condensing it down, but when you have in 5 or 6 key details that have to be presented in a certain structural order, or this task or whatever is going to fail, that you've got to be much more careful about. Just one observation that we made is we were evaluating questionnaires for job candidates. And, about 2 years ago, everybody started using ChatGPT. And every questionnaire we got was the same. So we had to kind of abandon it because it was all the same. No, we want to say, Lori, name a project that you worked on? And Lori would say, well, the project goes this way, and I have a project manager, and I survey the customer base, and it used bullet points always in the same place. And it was polished, and it read in a kind of a lifeless but classy prose kind of style. But it told us nothing.
Or I was reading some writing samples recently where somebody had clearly used AI in some places and then not in others, and there would be this just huge change in the writing style, and you could see that they had suddenly introduced AI and then not used AI. So it kind of almost made their own writing look worse because you could see the polished writing next to it.
Yeah, you can use, and I think your point about using it as a polishing tool is important. Ian Varley made the same point. He said, I like my prose, I want to write my prose, and, we can use it to help me get over humps and things like that. But ultimately, since we're responsible, it's as a tool, right? I think it's a magical tool. But I think one of the lessons, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that people are more important than ever. And it's how we wield that tool is extremely important.
Even when maybe humans aren't even reading our source content, maybe even when it's just behind the scenes and the agent is using it, it's really important that we do a good job with that writing.
For all the reasons that you have just said. Well, I cannot thank you enough. I just think these are incredible observations. And it was, like I said, it kind of hit me like a thunderbolt when I was sitting in some meeting with 40 people and you were walking through all of us. I thought, this is great. So thanks for taking some time.
It was really fun. Thank you.